Hey church, welcome and thank you for worshiping with us. Wherever you're at, in your home, watching on your TV, your laptop, or your phone, you are a part of this family. And you can watch and listen to past messages by heading to mycornerstone.family. On our sermons page, you can view playlists and search for past messages and more. You can even listen to our content by subscribing to Cornerstone America's podcast, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I hope you enjoyed the message and thank you for being a part of the Cornerstone family. Good morning, happy Easter, happy Resurrection Sunday, of course. That's what makes this day so great. And I want to talk to you about comebacks. Everybody loves a great comeback, don't they? Everybody loves to hear a great comeback story. And there has to be certain elements to a great comeback story. There has to be a major setback, right? There has to be major adversity. Something happens that just kind of sets you back. Either it's an individual or a group of people or a business or a team. There's a major setback. And then there is a comeback, something that they do or something that happens that allows them to come back and succeed and win in a sense. Everybody loves a good comeback story. I love a good comeback story. I think one of the reasons is because there's something in us that longs to see somebody overcome great adversity. It kind of gives us hope because we know we have our own issues, our own struggles, our own adversities, and we hope that we can overcome ours also. There's something about seeing somebody who's just, their life has been messed up by something and that they're able to overcome those odds. Overcome the adversity and the setback and have a great comeback. And of course, history is full of comebacks, right? We could talk all day about comebacks. Let me just share a few with you this morning. How about Albert Einstein? I'm going to move this just a little bit over to my side here. How about Albert Einstein, who developed the theory of relativity? That's way too smart for me to talk about this morning because most of the stuff he wrote I can't even understand, honestly, right? But we do know that he was expelled from school for being dumb. Smart teacher, right? And in 6 months, he taught himself calculus, self-taught calculus. Now, I barely made it through calculus, right? I said Calc 1, Calc 2, lucky to get through that. He was self-taught. He taught himself calculus. In 1905, he published 3 papers, which I really struggle to understand, that revolutionized the image of the physical universe and helped us lay the foundation for the nuclear age. Again, I don't understand it. Let's talk about somebody else this morning. Maybe somebody not as smart. I don't know. How about Thomas Edison? No, I'm going the wrong direction here. He was kicked out of school because they couldn't do anything with him. They said he was too slow to learn. So little Thomas was homeschooled by his mother. He made a great comeback. By age 10, he has set up his first chemistry laboratory. He became our nation's most famous inventor. Such highlights as the light bulb or phonograph. Phonograph? That's the ancestor of the record player. Record player, half the people here just lost me right there. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Record player, right? We got to go back many generations, right? We have digital music files now, but there were things called CDs, right? Look like coasters. You go back beyond that, we had tapes, cassette tapes, 8-track tapes. Anybody remember those, right? I'm going way back here. And we had record players, right? Go back even further, the phonograph. That was the ancient ancestor to the record player. Anybody still have a few records you just hold on to? They're just worth keeping nowadays. They're just collector's items. Anyways, let's get back to Thomas Edison here. Not only that, but the kinetoscope, he invented that, and that's like modern day movies came from there. About 1,300 inventions that radically improved our world. Major comeback there. And even in the Bible, we have a list of comeback stories. And how about Joseph, who went from the pit to the palace, right? Became prime minister of Egypt, one of the most powerful men in the world at that time. Great comeback. How about King David after his fall? Comeback. Job definitely would qualify as being a major comeback. Lots of comeback stories. How about John Mark, who left his first mission trip with Paul, deserted them, and had a great comeback? How about Peter? Peter has to be somewhere close to the top of this list, denying the Messiah 3 times. Jesus allowing him to come back and allowing him to preach the first message on the opening day of the church, the day of Pentecost, right? Great comeback. What's interesting is Sports Illustrated got in on this a few years ago in 2001, just a few years ago, bouncing back big time. They made a list of the top 10 comebacks, and I'm not sure about their list. There's one I definitely agree, number one there, but in number 10, Elvis Presley coming back with I don't know about that. Go-Go Boots, I found this one interesting. Go-Go Boots making a big comeback, very popular in the 60s and 70s. And around wintertime, we do see some, I'm going to stop talking about ladies' boots. Anyways, Go-Go Boots. Number 6, very interesting, humanity. 14th century, about 25 million Europeans died due to the Black Death. 25 million. Some estimates are higher, 75 million. They say that in Europe, 60% of the population died because of the Black Death. And it took a long time for humanity to come back from that. That's pretty significant right there, humanity being on the great comeback list after the Black Death. Muhammad Ali, great fight there. John Travolta got lost somewhere after the Sweat Hogs. Sweat Hogs, anybody remember the Sweat Hogs? Welcome back. I know, there's a few I'm talking to this morning. The rest of you going, I don't know what that is. Record player, don't know. All right, anyways, Michael Jordan, Japan and Germany after World War II. Of course, I think they got number 1 right. Jesus Christ, 33 AD, defies critics and stuns the Romans with his resurrection, the greatest comeback ever, right? And Matthew records it well. Matthew 28, verse 1 says, after the Sabbath, at the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake in verse 2, for the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes like white as snow. The guards were afraid of him, and they shook and became like dead men. Verse 5, the angel said to the woman, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. Verse 6, but he isn't here, for he has come back. He has come back to life again, just as he said he would. Come and see where his body was lying. The greatest comeback ever. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? The greatest comeback in history. And throughout John's gospel, he talks about this and leads up to this event being the greatest comeback ever. That's why over 1 billion people this weekend will celebrate Jesus, because it's the greatest comeback ever. I love the way John portrays it, really gets it from Jesus, how Jesus talked about what he knew was going to happen. He talked about it as being lifted up. When he went to the cross, he talked about it in advance to him being lifted up because he saw it. And John caught a hold of this, that it wasn't a tragedy, but it was a triumph. He wasn't a victim, but he was a victor through the whole thing. Listen to these few verses. John chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. Jesus is speaking here, and he says, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness. And we read about this in the Old Testament, that he lifted up the snake in the wilderness and it brought healing to those who were sick because they had been disobedient. He says, so the Son of Man, Jesus talking about himself, the Son of Man, must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. Lifted up. It's not a casting down. It is a lifting up. John chapter 8, verse 28, Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, again, he's talking about himself, then you will know that I am he and that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. It's a lifting up. It's a victory. It's not a tragedy. It is a triumph. And one of my favorites, John chapter 12, verse 32 and 33, and he says this, he says, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death that he was going to die. John caught a hold of this, hearing Jesus talk about it this way, and is writing this out for us so we would get the clue, we would get the hint that it was not a tragedy. It was a triumph. It was a victory. And I want to look at John chapter 19 this morning and talk about how John saw it, maybe not before it happened, but after, as he's looking back and he's writing, how he sees clearly what Jesus did for us as he went to the cross. My first point this morning is the way John saw it. He saw the cursed one destroys the curse of creation. John chapter 19, verse 1 through 3, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. If we go back to verse 2, The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Of course, they were mocking him. They didn't understand what they were doing. But if we go back, those of you who know your Bible, go back to our first parents, Adam and Eve. And when they sinned, a curse came on them and came on creation. And one of the evidences of that curse, or the result of that curse, is that the land now would produce thorns. And so they take this crown of thorns and they place it on Jesus' head. In a sense, it is saying prophetically that the cursed one is destroying the curse for us. The symbol of creation's curse is thorns, and they crown him with that. Galatians chapter 3, verse 13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. Here's Jesus taking on the curse for us, becoming cursed, destroying the curse in the process. Here's the second thing John points out to us we see is the weak one has all the power. John chapter 19, verse 7, the Jewish leaders insisted, we have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. And in verse 8, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Here's Pilate, a powerful man, and yet he's afraid, and he went back inside the palace, and he asked Jesus, where did you come from? But Jesus didn't answer him. And in verse 10, it says, do you refuse to speak to me, Pilate said? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? You know, it's interesting. Sometimes it's hard to know or recognize who actually has the power. You know, sometimes in our life, in our society, we see the wealthy businessman who has a lot of money and owns property and maybe has a huge business. We think he has the power, he has the authority. Or politicians who have never seen a microphone or a camera that they did not dislike. And we think they have the power. Or an actress or a music artist or an athlete with all the fame and all the money and all the glory. We think they have the power. And sometimes we don't recognize who has the power. Verse 11, Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Pilate thought he had the power. The Jews thought he had the power. Jesus knew who had power. Jesus said, you'd never have this power over me if it wasn't given to you. I think sometimes we miss who has the power. Who has the power? Sometimes even as Christians, we think, right, who has the movers? God is with the movers and the shakers, right? He's with those who are important. He's with the winners. He's in the winners' locker room because the winners have won, and God helped, Jesus helped them win. He's not with the losers. But isn't it true that we find God's power sometimes most evident in the midst of our failures, in the midst of our losses, in the midst of our weaknesses? And yes, even in the midst of our shame, in our biggest failures, and in the loser's locker room, so to speak, or at a funeral where we feel powerless. That's where we experience God's power the most, is when we're in a corner and it seems like there's no way out and we have no ability to affect change, and we trust God for a way out. When we're filled with shame, we're filled with failure, when we've blown it in our biggest mistakes and failures, it's in that moment that if we allow him, we experience God in that moment, and he changes our lives. It was the prodigal son who didn't experience the love for his father or the power of a restored relationship when he had money and was out there partying. But when he had lost it all and was in the pig pen of life, he came back to the Father. See, God's power is found not only on the mountaintop, but it also is found in the valleys of life. The third thing we see here is that the judged one is the judge. In John 19, verse 12, it says, for then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. In verse 13, then Pilate heard this, and he brought Jesus out and sat down. Notice he sat on the judge's seat. The judge's seat. This is, in the Greek, it's bema. It's the bema seat. And if, I'm going to go way back again. Anybody remember Petra? We're just going back a little bit. Petra, yeah, one of the earliest Christian rock groups. They had a song called the bema seat. That's where we learned this term from. That's where we all know it from, right? We didn't get it out of the English Bible. It's in the Greek. Bema seat. It's the judgment seat. And it's most known by those who read the New Testament in Greek is it's the seat that Jesus sits on to judge. But right now, Pilate is sitting on the bema seat. It's kind of hard to recognize and who is the judge. Right now, it looks like Pilate is the judge, and Jesus is the one being judged. But the judged one here is the judge. That we recognize and know that Jesus will judge all. And one of the places we struggle, I think, with our sinfulness is that we have a tendency to judge in places that we don't belong judging. Just as Pilate shouldn't have been judging the judge. And sometimes we make incredible excuses for ourselves, right? You name the sin, I can give you an excuse why it happened. We make excuses for ourselves. We allow ourselves so much slack. We let ourselves off the hook so often, but then we judge others around us that may be doing the very same thing we're guilty of. One of the healthiest things we can do as a person is stop judging those around us and recognize that one day, each one of us will stand before God and be judged. Judged for what we did with Jesus. Judged for how we related to those around us. Judged for how we used or didn't use the gifts and talents and abilities that God gave us for His glory, for His kingdom, for His sake. Judged. And then the fourth one here, the crucified one, we see is the King. John chapter 19, verse 14, it says, it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. Verse 17, carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which is in Aramaic, is called Golgotha. And in verse 18, they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. And then verse 19, most interestingly here, Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened it to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Now, John spends a significant amount of time talking about this sign that was above Jesus' head, King of the Jews. And rightfully so. So what would be typical of their day when they crucified somebody, they would hang a sign above them that would read whatever crime they were guilty of. This worked very well for them because if they, people passing by seeing that, knowing why they were crucified, thief, robber, rebellion, revolt, whatever it might be, they would say, yeah, I don't want to do that, right? Because I don't want to end up on a pole like that, dying for that. So it was a great way to get people to stop doing things. But they put above Jesus, this is what they put, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. That's what they wrote. Ironically, this is what they wrote above his head. Because he's not the victim, he's the victor. The crucified one is the king. What becomes even more interesting, John 19:20, many of the Jews read the sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, written in 3 languages. In 3 languages, they are proclaiming that Jesus is the king. Interestingly, Aramaic being the language of the Jews, kind of the ordinary language, the Greek language being the language of the intellectuals, of the philosophers, and the Latin language being the Roman language of the Roman government, of power, Roman power. And so you have these 3 languages that it is being proclaimed in. We could maybe look at it like this, is that he's the king of ordinary life, that they wrote it in Aramaic, daily speech for the Jews, the language of the Jews, that he's the king over ordinary life. You see, Jesus wants to be the king in our life. He wants to be the king over ordinary life, of our business affairs, of our family affairs, of our entertainment, of all that we do, all that we say, all that goes in us, all that goes out of us. He wants to be the king of ordinary life. But they also wrote it in Greek. It's like the language of the culture and philosophy, that Jesus is not just king of ordinary life, but he's king of culture too, and he wants to invade our culture. And he wants to know by all that's happening in culture that Jesus is king, whether it's high culture or low culture, right? You've got a high culture, you've got intellectual pursuits, you got university studies, you got scientists and research that's going on, you got the arts and the dance and the music, and he wants to invade that as king. Then you got the low culture, you just got popular entertainment, TV, movies, sports. and he wants to reign over culture as king. And then Latin, the language of the government affairs and government power. He's saying that he is the king over politics. He's the king over politicians. He's the king over the military. Jesus is king. But the Jews didn't like that. Verse 21 and 22, the chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the king of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be king of the Jews." But Pilate answered, "What I've written, I've written," right? All right, let's get to the last one here. The finished one finishes all. John 19, verse 30, when he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Jesus said, "It is finished." But in reality, it looked like to everybody standing around that he was finished. But he wasn't. And they thought he was finished. Didn't they? The Romans, the Jews, they thought he was finished. They thought this troublemaker now is behind them, right? That he's not going to cause them any more trouble. He's not going to question their authority. They're not going to ask questions of them that they can't answer. They thought they had gotten rid of this troublemaking Nazarene. But from the cross, we don't hear the moan of a beaten man that says, "I surrender, I give up, I am finished." But we hear the words of a victor that he says, "It is finished." And interesting, 3 words in the English, "it is finished." 1 word in the Greek, tetelestai. The last word that he says from the cross, tetelestai. It is finished, meaning it's complete. What he did is complete. He finished the task. Everything is done. Looking back to the Old Testament and all the sacrifices and all that it was pointing forward to, he completed it. He finished it perfectly for us and established or accomplished righteousness for us, that we would no longer have to work for salvation. We would no longer have to try and earn God's favor, that he would give it to us through Jesus freely. And he says from the cross, tetelestai, "It is finished." There's a story of a little boy named Philip. And Philip was born with a terminal disease that left him disabled. And he was a part of a 3rd grade Sunday school class, and there were other boys and girls in his class that were similar in his age. He was not really accepted there because of his terminal disease. And the teacher doing a great job of drawing him in and drawing the kids in to bond together. And it was the Sunday after Easter that she did a special craft with them. She had these eggs, you know, the pantyhose that comes in the egg. They had these eggs. And she gave each one of the kids, not the pantyhose, but the eggs, right? The empty eggs. And said, "I want you to go out into the yard, and I want you to find something that represents resurrection, that represents life. And I want you to put it in your egg. And I want you to bring it back in, and we're going to go through them and talk about each one of them." So they went out and they scoured the property and found stuff and put it in their eggs, and they came back. They all sat down around her, and she started to open up each egg one by one and open it up and pull it out. And somebody has a leaf representing new life. Somebody else had something else that represented new life, a flower, and different things that they had, all representing new life. And she got to this one egg and she opened it up, and it was empty. And the kids were kind of shocked and disturbed, like somebody didn't do it right. Somebody didn't do it. And little Philip opened up his mouth and he said, "That's my egg." He goes, "I did do it. I did it." I said, "No, you didn't do it. There's nothing in there." And he said, "I did do it." The tomb was empty. It wasn't too long after that Philip passed away. And at his funeral, the Sunday school teacher and her class, being there, came all with empty eggs, brought them in and laid them down. Because there's nothing more that shows what happened on that cross and in that tomb than the empty pantyhose egg. And it says to us, if Jesus can overcome the finality of death, what can he overcome in our lives. Nothing can withstand his power in our lives. And it should fill us with brave hope, the greatest comeback story of all time. Jesus, I think he's the most famous man in the world, regardless of continent or country. He's on the cover of more magazines. He's debated more than anybody else. Everything has to do with what do we do with Jesus. And if there's one area I'd want to press you on this morning is what are you doing with Jesus? What are you doing with the empty tomb? And for us here at Cornerstone, Jesus is our Savior. He is our hero. He is somebody we follow. We want to follow him with our lives as best we know how. And we're not perfect, and we make a lot of mistakes along the way. And when we do, we get back up and we just keep following. Next week, we're going to start a new sermon series. I'm calling it Your Mess Matters. And here's the thing, we all have mess, don't we? If we're honest about it, man, there is family mess, there is financial mess, there is business mess. Man, we got some personal mess, there's relational mess. I mean, we all have mess. And one of the things that the resurrection of Jesus shows is that he cares about our mess. And I don't know about you, but I'm glad that he cares about our mess because I've got enough mess. I need some help. And at the core and center of what we believe here at Cornerstone is 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 and 4, which Paul wrote out, which was really like an early hymn to the early church. They would memorize this and they would quote this and they would say this. And this is at the heart and core and center of what we believe. And Paul writes here, for what I received, I passed on to you as first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures.